Good. Well, thanks very much indeed for that. We've just heard the term. We've just heard several contrasting reports, really. Adrian was on stage at first and said there were various analysts saying that now was really the time for cloud computing, and other analysts saying it's going to be in a few years. And I've equally heard some business people saying that they don't think it's going to happen at all. Can I just ask, I first heard the term cloud computing in the early 1990s. Why do you think the time is right now for cloud computing to happen? And indeed, is the time right? Perhaps we can start with Paul.
Yeah, well, in my view, cloud computing started with the clip art that a lot of us used in the 90s. If you remember the clip art that had that picture of the cloud, we used to stick this picture of a cloud in a lot of our architecture diagrams and show systems connecting to the cloud and such to, as we drew the network diagrams, the enterprise architectures. Then we started talking about services and things moving into the cloud, and that's where this term cloud came up. So it's been around for a long time. I think the quote that we saw from Eric Schmidt earlier, and Scott McNeely's view that the network is the computer, was kind of pointing to this concept a long time ago. I do think it's a transformation. It's disruptive. It's a big thing for the enterprise. And I think what's different now are a few things. One is standards that we didn't have before. We tried these models in the past, ASPs, and we had the VM operating system on the mainframe and various modes of centralized cloud-like computing. You didn't have the standards that made it easy to move applications in and out. We didn't have TCP/IP until more recently. We didn't have web services standards and things to to allow us to connect in a flexible manner. So standards, there's scale, which I won't talk any more about. We heard a lot about scale, but scale gives the economic advantage. And there's new things around scale and new technologies and engineering techniques that Werner's doing with his company, Google and others are doing that bring the scale to it. And I think the other thing is comfort with commercial models. If you look at where we were in the 90s with things like outsourcing, enterprises being comfortable allowing others to run their applications and take some custody of their data and things like that. We've moved a lot with commercial models, and the idea of relying on somebody else for a service isn't a foreign concept as it might have been 10 years ago. So you put those things together, I think it's a new world where enterprises are getting more comfortable.
Okay, do you find that you have to evangelize this to your enterprise customers? Because you're a systems integrator rather than a user yourself. So do you find you have to evangelize this to your customers, or are you getting more and more people coming to you and saying, we want to know about cloud computing? Or is it all just task orientated?
Well, you get a mix. You get some people who the early adopters who are excited about it, that want to talk about it. You get people on the other end of the spectrum that want you to come in and say why this can never work because they don't think it can happen. I guess our approach and my belief is you got to tie it back to the business value that somebody can generate, the economic value that somebody can generate in an enterprise. So that's the way we try to look at it and address it, is say, well, what problems can you solve that you couldn't solve? How can you take some cost out of the organization? How can you innovate and enter a new market that you couldn't have? And look at that in individual industries and individual segments of the market and help our clients see the business value. That's the way we evangelize it.
Right. Okay. Carsten, as perhaps the academic observer in all this, from the outside, is it happening yet, or is there still resistance? What's the picture?
Well, I mean, the way I would look at it is to look at what are the big problems for business and how would this fit in. And the way I look at it, of course, as always, as academics, idiosyncratically, which means there are lots of other interesting problems you have to deal with in business, but I have the luxury of affording to only look at a couple of them. And I think one of the biggest problems for most, especially large companies, is that there's a huge difference between what customers expect in terms of individualized attention to their needs and immediate attention to their needs. And then on the other hand, business's ability to meet that demand. I heard an example not long ago from a discussion forum where children would discuss swapping of illegal movies from Pirate Bay. And there was a 15-year-old girl from somewhere in the mid of America who wrote a message saying that she thought it was appalling that a new movie that had just opened was not available yet to download for free. And of course, the expectation of that person is, things happen in front of you. So what the movie company did as a publicity stunt is they gave her free tickets to see the movie. But of course, that creates news because it is unheard of that any large corporation can meet individual demands of getting something for free like this. So I think that demand of being able to really provide individualized services, to listen to customers and to allow them to engage with you, means that companies, they have to be really clever at using a technology to do that. And that means a lot of the basic things that now companies spend a lot of time and effort on, that has to be in the background. And in order to really be able to offer individualized services and support and engagement, you have to automate as much as possible and allow the rest being done by either self-service by the customers or only use human discretion when it makes an absolute massive difference, like in innovation or sorting out the problems caused by systems that really can't be solved automatically. So I think the cloud computing plays an extremely important role in bringing the attention of the IT department to business issues that matters, and not the issues that really should just be in the background.
Okay, I mean, I'd like to pick up on that little anecdote of yours about that little girl. Perhaps if I could bring Werner in on this. A lot of your customers that you outlined up there were very, very substantial concerns. They cannot respond to every individual person who puts up some wacky message like, I can't see this film. They you know, sending them free tickets. That's just not going to happen every time. Do you find that there is are your customers finding that there is an area where they can't, people expect a personalised service and actually they just get something, just a different form of service than they were before?
Well, I think, so I think those two things those with cloud are actually the two different areas.
Sure,
If I look at maybe the e-commerce side, yes, I think customers are expecting a fully personalised approach. I think we've kind of pioneered that. I think there's no site in the world anymore where if you do not get reviews, you know, they're no longer there. Amazon is now the largest seller of small household appliances. Why? Because customers trust their opinions more than actually the folks that you meet in the stores. So I think, yeah, there's large transformations going on. But coming back, I think actually more to the enterprise world. I think the fact that you know, product development times are shortening, and with an increasing competition, it's actually driving you know, concerns around time to market. Do I actually have the resources on my demand to innovate at the speed that I want to innovate? And I think those are more important business drivers than whether or not consumers are actually wanting an extra ticket. I do think that opens up scale. And certainly on the way that enterprises engage with their customers. But I think you know, product development, increasing competition, you know, abundance of products out there in the market is actually bigger drivers for the uncertainty. And as such, make cloud computing an interesting model. I do think there's also, and it's another point actually coming back to your original question, I think there were a number of technologies that needed to be developed that were not there in the 90s. I think virtualization needed to mature to the point, not only CPU virtualization, but also virtualization of the network and the storage. That clearly, software as a service, as much as that, I think Salesforce and many other, there's a number of 6 or 7 very large billion-dollar public traded companies that do software as a service. But I think we needed to learn how to actually reliably run those services, how to develop software that needs to be operated as well instead of shipped on DVDs. Distributed computing clearly needed to evolve to a point to solve these massive scale problems. And software and service-oriented architectures needed to evolve as well. You know, how can you have a simple description of a service put out on the internet and anybody out there can access this regardless of programming language, regardless of tools that they need to use. So those technology areas needed to evolve as well before we could actually get to delivering these services at scale to customers.
Okay. Thinking about scaling and thinking about the other infrastructure-related issues, I'd like to ask Nick, you were quite forthright about how the time is right, and we're on day one effectively, but the time is definitely right for us to move forward in the cloud. We also heard Nikesh earlier talking about how you'd see people without email standing outside smoking a cigarette, or not smoking a cigarette in this day and age because you're not allowed to in a public place. If the network goes down, you lose just everything. You know, how confident are people that you speak to in the infrastructure issues, do you think?
They're much more confident, I think, than they were even a year or two ago. That doesn't mean that, you know, there aren't going to be instances of downtime, particularly as we continue the build-out of the infrastructure. There are going to be problems. Most of those, there's various sorts of problems, from, you know, losing a service for a brief period of time, a few minutes, maybe a few hours, which happens, but happens rarely, I think. And then, you know, more serious problems like a loss of data or something, which is quite rare, but as we've seen recently, not impossible. I think there are 2 points to be made. One is that companies, internal systems have similar problems, and you really have to compare apples and apples when you look at the reliability and the standards of cloud providers, and they're going to vary, and that's going to be an important purchasing criterion. But also as well, I think over time, the cloud suppliers are going to have to be able to deliver not just what their customers are used to, the kind of reliability their customers are used to running their internal systems, but a much higher level of reliability in order to gain the trust of customers, particularly very large customers. And really, the future of the cloud computing business hinges enormously on the question of trust. So the cloud has to be much better than internal systems in the end.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
And of course, it has that premise, of course. I think I was recently at a big RSA meeting on Wall Street where most of the risk managers are there. And actually, one of the top chief security officers of one of the world's largest banks there made the statement that he felt that if all Wall Street would move into the cloud today, 80% of them would be instantly more secure than what they are now. If you look at the situation, for example, around New York, where many companies have grown through acquisitions and mergers, many companies may actually have properties in 15 different data centers. They may own 2 of them. The other 15, they actually don't really know where their assets are. They don't know how they are protected. Yeah? And so centralizing this, but also capitalizing on some of the expertise that is there will allow companies to achieve much better security than what they're able to achieve themselves in their own environments.
Okay, I do have plenty more questions, but we are running up against the clock and these people will want coffee, so I'm going to throw this open to the audience. If anyone has any questions, could I please ask you, if you do have a question, wait until the microphone is actually with you, simply because there's an overspill room where some of the lesser people have gone to listen to this, and they won't know what the answer is all about until, actually I hope they didn't hear that. They will have heard that, won't they? Okay, as I was saying, yeah, I'm going to stop digging and throw it over to the audience. So if you could wait for the microphone, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Do we have questions, please? We have lots of questions. That's great.
Hi, David Bradshaw with IDC. One of my concerns as one of the people of the cloud team at IDC is over security. That's one of my nightmares. I was speaking to a small cloud service provider who'd only just got started, and he was staggered by the amount of attacks, none of them, as far as he could tell, successful, that were coming at him over the internet. One of the worries I have is that as we build ever larger cloud facilities in the cloud, that it's going to look like an enormous honeypot to anybody who can actually get through the door at any point.
Well, we've been this honeypot for a number of years now. So, no, I think we take security. I mean, if you look at the top investments for the coming year for us, operational excellence as well as security remains top, absolutely. But remember, we've been in this business for a long time. We're not very public about the techniques that we use. I think there is no finish line in security. There's continuously give and take. And there's different kinds of attacks where you have to defend yourself against, whether it's just pure DDoS or whether it's actually breaches of security around data and things like that. I think investment in this is absolutely crucial. But as Nick also mentioned earlier, these are concerns that you will be confronted with yourself as well. The fact that whether it's your business running in the cloud, enjoying a number of the security features that, for example, are unique for Amazon, versus having to do those things for yourself in your own environment. Maybe you can delay that by a year by trying to remain obscure. These are things that you will be confronted with yourself over time anyway. Yeah,
Carsten, you want to come on? Sorry.
Well, I mean, just a simple note. Of course, if we were aware of the amount of traffic death every year on the road in private cars, we would probably think about banning car driving. So the point is, of course, that when something happens in a large scale, so as one airline company says, we kill people in batches, and that's the problem. When you do it in trickling, then it doesn't matter so much. So of course, the problem is in a global media society, big events will create big messages, and of course, it's only a problem once it's not part of the course, that you accept that this is the situation. I think that's.
But security, I think, and that is beyond cloud computing. Actually, I think for our industry, security should be priority number one. I think guarding of our data, guarding of our customers should be your utmost concerns. It has been for 15 years at Amazon. I believe that's one of the reasons why customers trust Amazon as a retail company. But it should be absolutely priority number one in our whole business, not just in cloud computing. In the way that we build applications, in the way that we protect customers, in the way that we protect individuals using maybe the software that we ship. It should be absolutely priority number one, and it clearly is in the cloud computing business.
Okay, Paul, perhaps you could give us a comment on what your customers are.
Yeah, I'm just going to add one point on, which is I think the point about customers facing the same issue is a key one. And when you look at the distributed denial of service attacks and a lot of the things that people are coming under, cloud-based models offer a lot better ability to protect yourself against those and the way you can respond and defend yourself against those attacks. So I think the cloud-based providers have some more tools at their disposal than the average enterprise does as they figure out how to respond to these threats, which will be an advantage of the cloud models.
You also may expect that we're innovating in that area tremendously. I think if you look a few years ahead, changes will be dramatically. There's a number of new security tools that we've been putting out in terms of how customers can really describe access to the objects. Like this object can only be accessed by these customers from Germany, from that subnet between 3 and 5 on Fridays, and they only have write access versus read access. So those kind of new tools that are coming into life, are things that you can find in the cloud where we can do this kind of innovation because they are important for our customers.
Okay, great. I'd like to move to another question. We're going to be running short of time. Thank you very much. Could we have a microphone over there for a gentleman in the yellow jacket, please?
Good morning. John? You John? Oh.
It's on now. Thank you.
I'm Josep Coder from ESA Business School. My question is towards the community of consultancy firms. Okay, I was looking a few weeks ago at a very sleek package that is served through cloud computing, expensereport.com. I spent almost the morning with it. And at the end of the day, I said to myself, if I was a freelancer, I'll probably use it. If I have to deploy it in a larger scale organization, I don't see anyone there to help me making this a reality. So this is a question to or a challenge to the manufacturers of software and services that are trying to go from the consumer to the corporation. How you guys are going to react to this, and how the consultancy firms are going to react. Because I know well that if I call Accenture or IBM to install SAP Expense Report or Oracle Expense Report, they will send a crowd of people. It's going to be very expensive, but it's going to happen. So this is my biggest challenge. How you guys, the manufacturers, are going to switch from, single consumer to the corporation, and then you guys, how you're going to change your model to help corporations deploying these sort of services.
Well, perhaps we could have Paul on that first. Is this actually turning your whole business model upside down?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because I think it changes a lot of the business model. The other thing I'd say is, that when you look at application software in particular, you have to really look at different segments of the market, and the segments are at very different spots. So in the CRM space, you'll hear from Mark Benioff at Salesforce.com later, very advanced with his company and others in the SaaS-based, cloud-based CRM tools. If you look at the deep core systems of a lot of companies, hydrocarbon supply chain and oil and gas, core banking systems in banking, et cetera, very different story in terms of when they're ready and going to be migrated or moved or lifted and shifted to the cloud. So the way we look at it is we have to do both, and I think most of our enterprise customers are going to be in a hybrid world with both cloud solutions and legacy solutions for a decade, 2 decades, a long period of time. We were talking earlier today that the net base of COBOL code is growing by 5 billion lines of code a year. We're accumulating more COBOL on the mainframe than less. So we're shifting our business. We have a cloud practice and a SaaS practice. I think most of the firms like Accenture have that already. If we're deploying CRM solutions, it's typically done in a cloud fashion now using Salesforce.com or Oracle, SQL on Demand or things like that. So we're adapting our models. What we find though is when our customers are trying to solve a problem, I'll give you an example, an insurance company they wanted to roll out a new sales effectiveness process globally across 30,000 sales agents around the world. They wanted to use Salesforce.com to do it. When you looked at what they needed to do in the effort, our estimate is it's about 75 to 80% of what it would have been with an on-premise software solution to do it with Salesforce.com. So you still have to design business processes and change them. You still have to design the configurations. You still have to configure a system, convert the data, cleanse the data, maybe even more so than you used to. You have to test the system. You have to do user acceptance tests. You have to train and roll out. When you look at that, it's about two-thirds to three-quarters of the work we used to do. But we do it in a very different way. So on that example I gave, we deployed our first production release 2 weeks after the initial project team was formed with the client. So 2 weeks to first production release, and a very agile delivery to tens of thousands of users over 25 countries in a 6-month period. So it's a very different way than the traditional way of working, and I think that's the advantage in agility that businesses get out of cloud models as they're ready, to solve the kinds of business problems that they're looking to solve.
From what I know about consulting firms, I think they'd be more than happy to send a crowd of people to help you implement a cloud computing solution. And I think that those kind of services sprout up naturally when there's demand for them. On the other hand, what I would hope, and no offense to Paul or anything, is that cloud computing would reduce the corporate need for consultants by simplifying the process of allocating the IT resources that are required. And over the long term, a lot of the things that used to require consultants will become more and more automated in the systems.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for possibly one more question. Sorry, but we are running up against coffee break. Do we have a question from the people to whom I have my back? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Peter Morbius from Orange Business Services. Two questions maybe, which I think are interlinked with each other. As we move from the consumer world to the business world, there are more regulatory constraints. So first of all, for example, you have to have legal requirements on where your data is stored. Take, for example, HR data in Germany. You have to, I'm coming from Switzerland, you know about the banking data, etc. has to be physically stored in country. First question about, how can you actually commit as a company that you know where the data is stored, number one. Number two is actually also, as we go through disruptive periods, you may have companies, of course, entering and exiting the scene. So how do we actually make a change of supply, retrieving the data, and of course, changing the supply from one cloud computer to another one? Maybe two questions interlinked.
Right.
Yes, so I'm fully aware of all the regulatory requirements. And I think if you look at infrastructure as a service, for us it was important to make sure that we would give tools to our users to make sure that they could exactly allocate the resources in those areas where regulatory requirements. We actually, our cloud is not a truly transparent cloud. We actually divided things up in regions, and accidentally those regions not only follow geographical lines but also jurisdiction lines. So for some requirements at this moment where you need to go very fine-grained, we're not able to meet those requirements. But definitely we put a lot of effort in our architecture, making sure that customers who want to store data in the EU can store data in the EU, but that not even the metadata of that data would flow back into the US, clearly meeting regulatory requirements around that. So the same goes for within the US and within Asia. I think it needs to be made explicit. If you need to be able to place your applications in those places where regulatory requirements make that happen.
Okay, anyone else?
Just on the exit cost point, the one point I'll make is I think there's a perception that the cloud models, you plug and you unplug and it's easy. My belief, the exit costs are actually quite high for cloud models, particularly until there's more standards. When you look at the competencies that an organization might give up if you're relying more on cloud operations for some of the capabilities they're providing. So the exit costs of leaving a cloud environment and going back to in-house or moving to another cloud, I think is something you really need to think through, and it isn't necessarily a plug and play.
Okay. Well,
on the other hand, there are no long-term commitments up front, so if you do want to walk away, you can do it any moment.
Well, speaking of walking away, see what neat little segue. See what I did there. With apologies to anybody who didn't get their question in, I'm sure everyone will be around to answer things on a one-to-one basis over coffee, over lunch, and later on. So thank you very much indeed for your time, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. There is now coffee out that way. Thank you.